The sea roared against the sharp rocks below, sending white foam high into the air. Above the restless waters stood a fortress, once proud but now broken with age. Its walls leaned toward the sea, its towers cracked, and vines curled along its forgotten stones. The fortress looked as if it could crumble at any moment, yet it still stood like a stubborn guardian against time. Ryan stood on the cliff path, gazing at the sight. He had traveled many places across the galaxy, but this ruin held something different. It was not just stone and memory, it felt alive, like it was waiting for someone to come. The air smelled of salt and damp stone, and the cries of seabirds echoed around him. For a long moment, he simply watched the fortress, wondering why it pulled him so strongly. He stepped forward. Each stone beneath his boots felt uneven, as if warning him to turn back. But Ryan was not the kind of man who listened to warnings. Curiosity had guided him across countless worlds, and it had guided him here as well. He placed a hand against the cold wall of the gate and pushed. The old wood creaked, but it opened just enough for him to slip inside. The courtyard inside was quiet. Wind whistled through broken arches, carrying with it the sound of waves below. Grass grew between the cracks in the stone, and pieces of walls lay scattered like bones of a fallen giant. Still, Ryan noticed something strange. Parts of the fortress were not as ruined as they should have been. One wall had been patched with fresh stone. A roof beam looked recently repaired. He narrowed his eyes. Someone had been here. Ryan moved carefully, his hand brushing the hilt of his tool knife. He was not afraid, only cautious. He explored further, passing through long hallways with broken windows that looked out over the endless ocean. At one window, he paused. The sea stretched so far it seemed to swallow the sky, its waves shining with silver light from the setting sun. The beauty of it made his chest tighten. But then, in the corner of his eye, he caught something else, a flicker of light deeper within the fortress. He turned quickly. It was faint, almost gone, but he was sure it was there. A glow, like fire, or a lamp. Someone truly was here. Ryan followed. His footsteps were soft on the stone, and the air grew cooler as he moved deeper into the ruins. He passed through a narrow passage, then down a short stair, until he came to a wide hall. The roof above had mostly collapsed, but in one corner stood a small fire. Around it were simple things, a clay pot, a folded blanket, a pile of gathered wood. Someone was living here. He bent down, touching the edge of the fire pit. The ashes were still warm. Whoever they were, they had been here very recently. A sound reached him then, soft, like the scrape of stone against stone. Ryan froze, listening. It came from beyond the broken archway ahead. Slowly, he rose and moved toward it. When he stepped through, his eyes widened. Across the chamber stood a figure. Not human, but not frightening. She was tall and graceful, her skin faintly marked with patterns that glimmered when the light touched them. Her hair was long, falling over her shoulders, and her eyes, wide and calm, fixed directly on him. She was holding a stone block in her hands, as if she had been repairing part of the wall. For a moment, both stood in silence, the sound of the sea filling the space between them. Ryan felt no threat from her, only surprise. He had heard stories of her kind, though he had never met one before. They were known for their loyalty to old places and forgotten duties. "You should not be here," she said softly, her voice carrying both warning and sadness. Ryan tilted his head, studying her. "And yet, here I am. And you are the one keeping this fortress standing." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as though she was deciding whether he was friend or intruder. The silence stretched long, and Ryan felt the strange pull again, the same one he had felt when he first saw the fortress. It was not just the place. It was her. The sea thundered below, and the old stones seemed to listen. In that crumbling fortress on the cliffside, two strangers had finally met. The silence between them stretched, broken only by the crash of waves far below. Ryan stood with steady eyes, while the alien woman kept her gaze firm on him. Her hands still held the stone block, though she set it gently aside as if testing whether she should trust him or not. "You found this place," she said finally. Her voice was calm but carried a guarded tone. "Few come here. Fewer leave." Ryan did not move closer. He respected the sharpness in her words. Instead, he gave a small nod. It looked abandoned. "I wanted to see what remained." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Abandoned? No. Broken, yes. But not without care." She gestured around at the patched stones, the half-mended walls, the effort she had poured into holding the fortress together. "I keep it standing. Without me, it would already be gone to the sea." Ryan studied her quietly. He saw strength in her posture, but also weariness in her eyes. The fortress was vast, and she was alone. It struck him as both admirable and sad. "And you do this alone?" he asked. She gave a small nod. Her expression softened for just a moment, as if she was surprised someone would even ask. "Yes. It is my duty." Ryan tilted his head. "Duty to who?" At that, the woman's gaze drifted toward the broken ceiling, where the sky glowed with fading orange light. "To those before me. My people once built this place with yours." Together they shaped stone, raised walls, and watched the horizon. It was a sign of hope. "Now it is only me left to remember." Her words carried a quiet weight, as if each syllable was a memory too heavy to set down. Ryan felt something stir in him. He had traveled long, seen ruins across distant worlds, but here, in this lonely fortress, history breathed. And here was someone who refused to let it die. "My name is Ryan," he said, breaking the silence. He offered the name like a small bridge between them. She hesitated, then replied, "Alira." The name settled between them, soft yet strong, much like the woman herself. For a while they simply looked at each other, neither willing to turn away first. The sea air swept through the open stones, carrying the scent of salt and the cries of birds. Ryan noticed the faint glow on her skin again, patterns like shifting silver lines. They reminded him of starlight reflected in water. He took a careful step forward, though he stayed at a respectful distance. "Alira, why stay here when the sea takes more of the cliff every day? Why not leave?" Her eyes held his, and this time he saw the truth, their loneliness mixed with determination. "Because if I leave, this place dies. And if it dies, so do the stories. I am the last who remembers." Ryan let her words sink in. He understood something then. This fortress was not just stone to her. It was family, history, a promise she refused to break. Still, he saw the shadow of solitude in her face. Years, maybe decades, of silence and storms. "I understand," Ryan said quietly. "But even the strongest wall needs help to stand." Her eyes flickered, surprise breaking through her calm. It seemed no one had spoken to her like that before. For a moment, her expression softened, almost tender, before the guard returned. "You speak like you know these stones," she said. Ryan smiled faintly. I speak like someone who has seen too many ruins. And I think this one still has life. A long pause followed, filled with the sound of waves striking rock. Alira finally turned away, moving back toward the half-built wall she had been working on. She lifted the stone again, placing it carefully into a gap. "You should go," she said, though her voice no longer held the same sharp edge. "This place is not safe. The storms come fast, and the cliffs break without warning." Ryan watched her hands press the stone into place, steady and skilled. "If I leave," he said, "I will always wonder who kept the last fortress standing against the sea. I would rather stay a little longer, if you will allow it." Her hands paused on the stone. She did not look at him, but he noticed the faintest shift in her shoulders, a hesitation, a crack in her solitude. At last she whispered, "Stay if you wish. But do not expect kindness. The fortress has no room for comfort." Ryan gave a quiet nod. "I've lived with less comfort before." For the first time, Alira's lips curved in the smallest of smiles, though it vanished as quickly as it came. She returned to her work, while Ryan settled against a fallen pillar nearby, his eyes tracing the broken ceiling that framed the night sky. The fortress, once silent, now held two souls within its crumbling walls. Neither spoke further that night, yet both felt something had shifted. For Alira, it was the sudden awareness that she was not entirely alone anymore. For Ryan, it was the strange, unspoken pull that told him his journey had truly begun here beside a mysterious watcher who guarded ruins against the endless sea. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the cracks of the broken fortress walls. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of salt and wild grass from the cliffs. Ryan woke to the sound of gentle movements nearby. Alira was already awake, her hands busy as she carried stones to the half-mended wall. She worked with quiet focus, her long hair shifting slightly in the wind. Ryan rose from where he had rested near the fire. He stretched his arms and studied her for a moment. She seemed used to this life, lifting, repairing, guarding. Yet beneath her graceful strength, he saw the weight of solitude pressing on her shoulders. Without a word, he walked over and picked up a loose stone. Alira paused, her sharp eyes narrowing as if ready to protest. "You do not know how to build this wall," she said firmly. Ryan gave a small smile. "Then you can teach me." For a long moment, she said nothing, simply watching him. Then, with a quiet sigh, she gestured toward the gap in the wall. "Place it here, but flat side down. Otherwise, the wall will not hold." Ryan followed her instructions carefully. The stone slid into place, a perfect fit. He looked up, and to his quiet satisfaction, Alira gave a brief nod. So began their work together. They spent the day side by side, carrying stones, smoothing edges, and fitting them into the gaps. Alira explained her methods with few words, her tone steady and precise. Ryan listened closely, learning not only how to place stones but how each piece carried weight for the whole wall. He found it almost like a lesson in life itself, small efforts building something stronger than either of them alone. During their pauses, Ryan tried to draw her into conversation. At first, Alira spoke little, answering in short phrases. But as the hours passed, her voice grew less guarded. She told him of her ancestors, how her people once lived in harmony with humans here. They had built the fortress as a symbol of unity, overlooking both land and sea. Long ago, there was trust, Alira said softly, brushing dust from her hands. But time and storms broke more than just stone. My people left. Your people forgot. Now only I remain. Ryan leaned against the half-built wall, gazing at her. "And you've been holding it together alone all this time?" She gave a faint smile, though it carried sadness. "Someone must remember. If not me, then no one." Ryan thought of his own travels. He had walked through silent ruins across distant worlds, places where no voices remained to tell the stories. Those places had felt empty. This fortress, however, felt alive because of her. "You carry more than these walls," he said gently. "You carry the weight of the past too. That's a burden no one should carry alone." Alira turned her head toward him, her silver-patterned skin catching the sunlight. For a brief moment, her eyes softened in a way that made Ryan's chest tighten. But then she looked away, lifting another stone. "You speak as if you know loneliness," she said. Ryan's smile was faint but real. "I know it well. Traveling makes the galaxy wide, but it also makes the nights quiet. That's why I stayed here." Something about this place felt less empty. Alira paused, her hands resting on the stone. She did not answer, but he noticed the way her shoulders relaxed slightly, as if his words reached her in ways she would not admit aloud. By evening, the wall stood taller and stronger than it had in years. The two of them sat by the fire again, the sound of the ocean filling the silence. The sky above was painted in streaks of orange and gold, the last light glimmering across the waves. Alira spoke first this time. "You did well today. The wall will hold against the next storm." Ryan looked at the repaired stones with quiet pride. "We did well. Together." She glanced at him, her lips pressing into the smallest smile before fading again. Yet Ryan caught it. It was a sign that something was shifting between them, something as real as the stone wall they had built side by side. The fire crackled, throwing warm light across their faces. Ryan leaned back against a fallen pillar, while Alira sat with her hands folded in her lap, her eyes on the flames. Neither spoke of it, but both felt it, the unspoken bond that was slowly forming in the heart of the crumbling fortress. The walls might be broken, the cliffs might be fragile, but here, in the quiet of shared burdens, something new was being built. The sea grew restless as evening approached. Clouds gathered across the horizon, dark and heavy, and the wind howled louder than usual through the broken windows of the fortress. Ryan stood at the edge of the courtyard, watching the waves crash higher against the rocks below. He had seen storms before, but something about this one felt sharper, more dangerous. Alira was busy on the western wall, tightening the last stones they had placed the day before. She worked quickly, her movements calm, but Ryan could sense the tension in her shoulders. The fortress had stood against many storms, but every crack and broken tower made it more fragile. "This storm looks worse than the last," Ryan said, raising his voice against the rising wind. Alira pressed her hand against the patched wall, testing its strength. "It will test us," she replied. "Every storm does." Ryan walked closer, his eyes moving across the jagged cliffs below. A thought passed through him: if one wrong step was taken, the sea would claim whoever fell. The cliffs were merciless, and the fortress leaned dangerously toward them. When the first drops of rain fell, Alira insisted on checking the southern tower. "It is weakest," she explained. "If it collapses, the rest may follow." "I'll go with you," Ryan said quickly. Alira shook her head. "It is my task." But Ryan was firm. "Then it's ours. No wall stands with one stone alone." Her gaze lingered on him for a breath, as though testing if he truly meant it. Then she nodded, and together they made their way across the slick stones toward the southern side. By the time they reached the tower, the storm was in full force. Rain lashed against their faces, and the sea roared louder than thunder. The tower shook beneath the weight of the wind, stones groaning as if they might break apart at any second. Alira climbed the narrow steps along the edge, her hands gripping the wall as she checked the weak points. Ryan followed close behind, ready to steady her if she slipped. His heart pounded not from fear of the storm, but from watching how close she moved to the crumbling edge. Suddenly, a piece of stone gave way beneath Alira's foot. She gasped as her body lurched forward, her balance breaking. For one terrifying moment, her arms flailed against the empty air, the sea raging far below. Ryan reacted without thought. He lunged forward, grabbing her wrist before she could fall. The force pulled him down to his knees, his body pressed against the wet stones as the wind tore at them both. His muscles strained as he held on, refusing to let go. "Hold," he shouted through the storm. Alira's wide eyes locked on his. For the first time since he met her, her calm broke. Fear flickered across her face, raw and unguarded. Her other hand clawed at the stones until she found a grip. With Ryan's strength pulling her upward, she scrambled back onto the narrow ledge. Together they collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, the rain soaking them completely. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the storm raged around them. Then Alira turned her face toward him. Her breath came fast, her chest rising and falling, but her eyes held something different now, something deeper. You saved me," she whispered. Ryan gave a tired but firm smile. "You said this place cannot stand alone. Neither can you." Her gaze lingered on him, her silver-marked skin glowing faintly as lightning lit the sky. There was no wall between them in that instant, only the storm and the fragile bridge formed by trust. They stayed pressed against the stones until the worst of the wind passed. Slowly, they made their way back down to the safety of the courtyard. The fire had been put out by rain, but the two of them hardly noticed. Their hearts still beat with the memory of the fall that almost was. Inside the broken hall, Alira sank onto a stone block, her hands trembling slightly though she tried to hide it. Ryan sat across from her, watching her quietly. "You risked yourself," she said after a long silence. "Why?" Ryan leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Because no one should face the storm alone. Not even you." Alira's lips parted, as if she wanted to argue, but no words came. Instead, she lowered her gaze, her expression softer than he had ever seen. For the first time, the fortress did not feel like her only shield. She realized she had someone standing with her now. The storm continued through the night, waves striking the cliffs and winds rattling the stones. But inside the fortress, two hearts carried a new strength. The fragile bridge between them had held, and it was stronger than either had expected. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the fortress wet and shining under pale sunlight. Pools of rainwater collected in the cracks of the courtyard, and the air smelled fresh, almost sweet. Ryan walked slowly along the walls, checking for damage. Some stones had loosened, but the fortress still stood. Alira moved quietly beside him, her steps sure even on the slick stone. She looked more thoughtful than usual, her eyes distant as though she was replaying the night in her mind. The memory of nearly falling lingered in both of them, but so did the memory of Ryan's hand gripping hers, steady and unyielding. "Your strength kept me alive," she said suddenly, her voice low. Ryan glanced at her. "And your strength has kept this place alive. We share the burden now." She looked at him for a long moment, her silver-marked skin catching the morning light. Then she gave a quiet nod, as if accepting something she had resisted for too long. Later that day, while checking the southern passage for cracks, Ryan noticed a hollow sound when his boot struck a certain part of the floor. He paused, then knelt down. The stones beneath him looked uneven, almost as if they had been placed to hide something. "Alira," he called softly. She came over, her eyes narrowing as she studied the spot. For a moment, her calm mask slipped, and a flicker of recognition crossed her face. "I have passed this way many times, but I never thought to listen closely," she murmured. Together, they cleared away the broken rubble, lifting the stones until a hidden opening revealed itself. A set of narrow steps led downward into the dark. Cool air drifted upward, carrying the faint scent of dust and something ancient. Ryan looked at her. "Shall we see what your ancestors left behind?" Alira hesitated, her hand resting on the edge of the opening. "This place has slept for centuries. If we wake it, we must tread with respect." Ryan nodded. "Respect is something I can give." They descended slowly, their footsteps echoing against stone. The air grew cooler, and the sound of the sea faded above. At the bottom, the passage opened into a wide chamber. Despite the years, the room was intact, its walls carved with symbols of both human and alien design. Lanterns long extinguished lined the walls, and in the center stood a table of smooth stone. Upon it lay relics covered in dust but still preserved. Ryan's eyes widened. There were tools, small statues, and fragments of writing evidence that once, two peoples had stood here together. He reached out carefully, brushing away the dust from one relic. It was a carved piece showing humans and Alira's kind working side by side, lifting a wall together. Alira stepped closer, her breath catching as her fingers hovered over the carving. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "This is what I was told of, but never saw. Proof that we were not always apart." Ryan looked around the chamber, his heart stirring. They built more than walls here. They built trust. For a moment, silence filled the chamber, heavy but warm. The glow of Alira's markings reflected off the stone, lighting the symbols faintly. She looked almost as if she belonged to the carvings themselves, a living piece of history. "They hoped this place would stand as a promise," she whispered. "And I have guarded it without ever knowing these truths." Ryan placed a hand on the smooth stone table. "Then perhaps you were never guarding it alone. Their memory was waiting here, just for you to find." Her eyes lifted to his, full of quiet wonder. "And for you, a stranger, to stand beside me now, it feels as if their promise lives again." Ryan's chest tightened at her words. He realized then that the fortress was more than ruins and storms. It was a bridge between two worlds and now, between two hearts. They explored the chamber for hours, studying the relics. Ryan read the simple words carved in both languages, while Alira explained the symbols he did not understand. At one wall, they found a mural half hidden by stone. Clearing it together, they revealed an image of two figures, one human, one alien, standing hand in hand at the cliff's edge, watching the sea. Alira's fingers brushed the image gently. "Perhaps they knew this place would one day test us again. Perhaps they hoped others would continue what they began." Ryan looked at her, his voice steady. "And perhaps that's what we are doing right now." Her gaze lingered on his, and in her eyes he saw something unspoken yet undeniable, a connection growing stronger with each shared discovery. When they finally climbed back to the surface, the sun was dipping low, painting the sea in gold. The fortress no longer felt only broken. It felt alive, its history breathing again through the hidden chamber. And within its crumbling walls, Ryan and Alira carried not only the burdens of the past but the hope of something new rising between them. Days passed after the discovery of the hidden chamber, and the fortress felt different. The air inside seemed less heavy, as though the voices of the past now whispered with pride instead of sorrow. Ryan and Alira spent their mornings repairing walls and their evenings studying the relics they had uncovered. The time they shared grew longer, the silences between them warmer. But even as their bond deepened, a shadow of worry began to form in Alira's eyes. Ryan noticed it each time the sea wind swept across her face, each time she paused in the middle of a task as though listening for something unseen. One evening, when the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in red and gold, Ryan found her standing at the edge of the courtyard, her gaze fixed on the endless sea. "You're thinking of leaving," he said quietly. Alira turned, surprise flashing across her face, but she did not deny it. Instead, she lowered her eyes. "My people may soon call me back. I have stayed longer than I was meant to." Ryan's chest tightened. "And if they call you, will you go?" Her voice was soft but firm. "It is my duty. I was sent to guard what remained, not to bind myself to a stranger's path." The word stranger stung, though her tone was not unkind. Ryan stepped closer, his eyes steady. "You don't believe I'm just a stranger anymore? You wouldn't still be standing here with me if you did." Alira's breath caught. She looked at him, her silver-marked skin glowing faintly in the last light of the day. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "You speak truths I cannot easily ignore." They sat together on a fallen stone, watching the waves below. The silence between them was heavy but not empty, it was full of questions neither dared to voice. Finally, Alira broke it. "My heart is torn," she confessed. "If I remain here with you, I break the promise of duty. If I leave, I break something I do not yet understand, something growing between us." Ryan turned his face toward her. "I've lived my life moving from place to place, never staying long enough to build anything lasting. But here, with you, with this fortress, I feel something I never felt before. Belonging." Her eyes widened slightly, as though his words touched something hidden inside her. Yet still, she shook her head. "Belonging is fragile. Storms break walls, time erases names. What if what we feel is only a moment, soon washed away?" Ryan's smile was gentle. "Then let it be a moment we choose, not one we lose by fear." Alira looked down at her hands, the silver patterns shimmering softly. She had been raised to serve tradition, to guard the old stones and honor the past. But the past did not prepare her for the warmth she felt when Ryan's voice cut through her loneliness, or the way her chest steadied when he stood beside her in the storm. That night, she did not sleep. She walked the halls of the fortress, her fingers trailing along the walls she had spent years repairing. Every stone carried memory, every crack carried her effort. Yet for the first time, she wondered if the fortress was meant to be her prison instead of her duty. Ryan found her at dawn, standing in the courtyard again. The rising sun painted her figure in light, and her eyes reflected the fire of decision. "I do not know what the right path is," she admitted. "But I know the fortress no longer feels empty when you are here. That truth weighs against my duty." Ryan stepped closer, his voice steady. "You don't have to decide tonight or tomorrow. But know this: whatever choice you make, I will not forget you. If you leave, I will carry your memory with me. If you stay, we will carry this burden together." Alira's lips parted as though to speak, but no words came. Instead, her eyes softened, and for the first time, she allowed herself to look at him not as a stranger, not as a traveler, but as someone who had already become part of her story. The sea roared below, but neither of them looked toward it. Their struggle was no longer with storms or stones, but with their own hearts. The fortress stood on the cliff's edge, cracked yet unbroken, just as they stood together torn between duty and desire, waiting for the moment when a choice would finally be made. The morning after Alira's confession, the fortress shook under the weight of another storm. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, thunder cracked like breaking stone, and waves smashed against the cliffs with a force greater than before. It felt as though the sea itself was testing them, daring the old walls to fall. Ryan rushed to secure the outer gates while Alira climbed the watchtower, her cloak whipping in the wind. Rain lashed across her face, but her eyes remained sharp. She called down to Ryan, her voice cutting through the storm. The sea is climbing higher than ever. If we do nothing, the lower walls will break. Ryan nodded, his body already soaked through. Then we fight to hold them together. They work side by side, hauling beams, shoving stones into place, and using whatever scraps of wood remain to block the weakest gaps. Each crash of the waves shook the ground beneath their feet, but neither gave up. The storm raged, yet so did their determination. At one point, a wall of water broke past the barriers, knocking Ryan onto the slippery stones. Alira's heart leapt as she saw him slide toward the edge. Without hesitation, she leapt down, her hand catching his wrist just as his boot scraped the cliff's rim. "Ryan," she cried, her arms straining as she pulled him back. He gripped her tightly, rain mixing with the salt water running down his face. When he stood again, they were both trembling, not from fear alone but from the raw truth of what almost happened. They pressed on, fighting against the storm until their bodies ached. And then, as suddenly as it began, the wind eased. The waves pulled back, and silence spread over the cliffside. The fortress still stood, battered but unbroken. Ryan and Alira sank onto the wet stones, breathing hard. The air smelled of rain and sea, and for a moment, the world felt hushed, as though waiting for their voices to fill it. Ryan turned to her, his chest rising and falling. "You saved me." Alira shook her head. "We saved each other. This fortress, it survived because we did not stand alone." The words carried more than their surface meaning. Both of them knew it. For a long time, they stared at one another, the storm's shadow still in their eyes. Finally, Ryan spoke again, his voice steady but gentle. "You said your heart was torn. Alira, mine has already chosen. I do not want to leave this place, not if it means leaving you. Whatever comes next, I would face it with you." Alira's breath caught. She had guarded her feelings for so long, wrapping them in duty, hiding them beneath silence. But now, with the storm gone and the fortress still standing, the walls around her heart seemed ready to break. She lowered her gaze for a moment, her silver-marked hands resting against the stone. Then, slowly, she looked back at him, her eyes shining not with sorrow but with quiet certainty. "I once believed my life belonged only to the past, to guarding what was already gone. But now, I see it also belongs to what I choose in the present. And I choose this." Her hand reached out, resting over his. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of every unspoken word between them. Ryan smiled, not the weary smile of a traveler, but one filled with hope. "Then we will rebuild these walls, not as ruins of memory, but as a home. A place for us." The fortress loomed around them, scarred yet unyielding, its stones glowing faintly in the returning sunlight. The sea still roared below, but it no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like applause, as though the world itself honored their choice. Alira leaned against Ryan, her head resting near his shoulder. For the first time in many years, she felt at peace. And for the first time in his wandering life, Ryan felt he had finally arrived where he was meant to be. The fortress on the cliffside was no longer just a crumbling relic. It was the beginning of something new, held together not by mortar and stone, but by the bond of two hearts that had finally chosen one another. And so, the sea would rage, the winds would howl, and time would continue its march, but within those walls, desire had become more than longing. It had become love.